All right, so we are live, so I'm going to go ahead and open the meeting. Good evening, welcome to the Wednesday, that throws me off a little bit, March 8th, 2023 special joint meeting of the school committee and CPAC. So we are here tonight. We have Amy Rebecca Gay, who is here as a consultant to help us work together. I am very much looking forward to this meeting and to our work together. We do not have anybody in the audience, but I am hoping that there are people at home who are able to tune in. So I'd like to turn that over to you.
Great, excellent. Would you like to just sort of encapsulate our purpose for today?
So I would. I also think it might be helpful to do introductions just for everybody as well, if that's okay. But
yeah. Oh,
yeah.
sorry. I didn't realize that everybody didn't know each other. So maybe we should
Well, and
do
also
that
for
first.
people at home.
Okay.
Do you want to go ahead and do introductions first?
Yes.
Okay,
I think
that would be
sounds
great. Okay. So Susan, do you want to start because you're on the end?
Sure. Susan Rothermick, I'm the Director of Finance for the schools.
Karen Zaleski, Director of Student Services for Hopkinton.
Jeff LeBron, Assistant Superintendent.
Carol Kavanaugh, Superintendent.
Amanda Fargiano, Vice Chair of the School Committee.
I'm Nancy Kavanaugh. I'm the chair of the school committee.
Holly Moran, school committee member.
Jamie Bronca, I'm the Vice Chair of CPAC.
Jen Halliday, Chair of CPAC.
Erica Siegel, Events Chair.
Sarah Coffey, Education Chair.
Thank you. So we are here, we're looking to chart a path forward for CPAC and the school committee and the administration, and looking to find kind of what the roadmap is for that and to work together. So that would be the very short bulleted. I know that you have had the opportunity to speak with each group of stakeholders separately. We don't know what the others have said, so it gives you a unique perspective on what we're doing here.
Well, so just maybe a little bit about the process. Before we decided to work together, I spoke with Carol, I spoke with you, and I spoke with, I think, Jen and Jamie. So we all sort of agreed and decided what our work would look like, so it was all informed in that way. I then had an hour-long interview with each of the stakeholders. So I spoke with Jen and Jamie, I spoke with Nancy and Amanda, and then I spoke with Carol and Karen. I'm so proud of myself for getting all the names right. This toughest part of my day is over. I just really trying to figure out, like, what did it look like from your perspective? What are some of the things that you wanted to see? What were you hoping to accomplish, and looking to frame the issue? So I've done my best. So I have to say, like, as an outsider, I do this all the time. I'm constantly, like, in and out of other people's organizations and other people's lives. And I often feel like I'm drinking from a fire hose because there's, like, so much that has happened. So let me just say I've done my best to encapsulate. And if there's something that I don't frame quite right, or that you would like to see tweaked or something, I mean, let's talk about that, right? It's sort of very much like a conversation. I don't want to say after speaking to everybody for an hour that I have a full, complete understanding, because that would just really be impossible. And so what I hope that I've done is to frame the issues and structure it in such a way that we can have a productive conversation, the goal of which leaving with how do you want to do the work together going forward, so that you have some really actionable things that you can do that make it easier and more productive to do your joint work on behalf of the community. And so I think, we think a lot about facilitators and people in this role and what our stance is and relationship and skills and all of that stuff. One of the ways in which people often talk about facilitators as being impartial or unbiased, which I hope to be. Another way of thinking about it, though, is to be equally partial. Is to sort of hold the interests and best well-being of everybody in equal balance. And I'm hoping that one of the things that has made me well positioned to be a facilitator for you today is that I live in a community, like we all do, I guess. I've got 2 kids, both of whom are on IEPs and have had some special needs, and we've had some challenging conversations around that. And I served on the school committee for 7 years, and I was chair for 3. And my first year as chair was our superintendent's first year as a superintendent in our district. And so I tell you, we were like attached to him. I think I talked to him more than I talked to anybody else that year. And so through all of these experiences, I feel like I have a really deep, deep, deep appreciation the professionalism and dedication of school administration. Nobody goes into secondary education for like fame or money. You do it because you care about the kids, and you invest a lot in your educations and a lot in your jobs and a lot of extra hours. School committee, it's a heavy lift, man. It is a heavy political lift for no money in a community that sometimes gets really angry at you for doing what you think is right. Like sometimes you walk out of meetings and your neighbors don't like you or want to talk to you. It's part of the job, but you show up, you come and you show up. Parents of special needs kids, oh my God, I totally hear you. It's a totally different kind of lift. And it's really challenging and a lot of different things to juggle. And sometimes it's not only just challenging, it sometimes feels just heartbreaking. Sometimes just feels really heartbreaking. As your kids struggle with things that you never expected they would struggle with, right? So, there's an extra need to be involved then in some of those conversations. So I think I just want to start maybe with just a general appreciation for everybody sitting at this table and like all the good that you're doing. Like why you're here, you're all here for like really good reasons. And I hope that through these conversations I can really help you do that in ways that are easier, I guess, as I would say, a little less fraught, as town politics I think can sometimes be challenging. It's not easy. So with that, anything Nancy or anybody else wants to add before we start? All right, so this is what I came up with. We've done our welcome and our purpose. Just some working agreements. Generally, anytime I facilitate, my question always is, how do we want to work together and have our conversations, and how can I best support you? So I have some that I'm going to recommend rather than creating those. Since we have limited time, I thought I would start off with some recommendations. Hopefully we'll get your approval. They're up for negotiation, by the way. I have framed our topics for discussion. We can talk about that. Did I miss anything? Is there something you'd like to say? Did I not capture something in quite the right way? Or did I bias it in some way that feels it's pointing in one direction or another that you're uncomfortable with? Let's talk about that. We'll have a discussion. I hope that we'll be able to capture some agreements. And then I will write these agreements up and then send them to each one of the stakeholders after the meeting. And so pretty much my goal is to type everything up pretty much as it is on the flip chart. Sometimes my flip chart writing gets a little sketchy, and I might, but anyway, you can always send back, no, that's not quite how I recollect it, but we'll eventually wind up with something we agree on, and we'll close. So that's my hope for the agenda. How does this sound? Does it meet people's needs, interests, expectations? Yeah? Okay. Step one complete. Hello, come on in. I'm Amy Rebecca, the facilitator, clearly, and you are?
Jen Devlin, hi. Nice
Hi,
to meet
Jen.
you.
Very nice to meet you. And where are you sitting? School committee, CPAC, administration?
Looks like I'm sitting between school committee and CPAC.
You are?
Yes, I am on the school committee.
Okay, thank you. So you confused me by sitting in the middle there. Okay, so working agreements. Be present and set aside devices. So I understand I'm a single parent, so there are times sometimes when I'm checking I cannot tell you, I'm gone out of the house for 2 hours, I get text, Mom, when are you gonna be home? How long are you gonna be? Are you bringing one stitch? Like, if you're responding to that kind of stuff, like do what you need to do. But if we can be present and set aside devices and not post on social media, that is one of the issues, to just really be here with each other. I think that would be really helpful. Assuming positive intent. And if you're not sure of someone's intent, because what happens in conflict when things get heated, we all have different lenses, and it's like conflict sort of charges those lenses, and they get a little bit more sensitive, and stuff can kind of ping on them. And so one thing, if you hear something and it doesn't strike you quite right, clarify. Ask a clarifying question. A clarifying question I like, this is actually really good in marriages too, by the way, which is, did you mean, and state what you took away the meaning, and ask, like, is that actually what you meant? I'm a facilitator, so you would think, I can't tell you how much in my marriage I actually get that wrong. So sometimes it can be really helpful to say, this is what I heard, what did you mean? So we can sort of like really try to work with what somebody's trying to say, and maybe not tripping up on particular words or language or things that might have been, it created little sparks in the past. Step up and step back. We have a lot of people present. most of the people who come to these kinds of meetings and volunteer for boards are comfortable speaking in public. So I would say, like, absolutely step up if you have something to say, but try to create room for people maybe who haven't stepped into that space. And also, I was thinking, we have, like, 4 representatives from the school administration, 4 representatives from, so if everybody speaks all on the same, and 4 and 4, we've got all 12. If everybody speaks on the same issue, we're not going to get through things. So if you have something to add, by all means add it, but let's try to encapsulate as tightly as we can, so that we don't sort of like say the same thing twice. Sometimes that happens. I'm not going to be a stickler for it, but I'm just sensitive to the fact that we have 2 hours and we have a large group, and I absolutely want all perspectives present, but some economy might actually just serve us collectively really well. I don't need to tell you a lot of water's gone under this bridge. And looking backwards might not be helpful in this particular situation here. So if we can remain forward-looking with the option of thinking, what is it that we want to do going forward? What do we want to happen? Instead of however we're feeling about what has happened. I think that might really serve the group better in giving us something concrete to step into once we all leave the room. How do these sound to you? Can I get the thumbs up from everybody? Yeah? Awesome. Anything anybody feels the need to add? Okay. All right. This is how I have framed the issues. I've tried to go for simplicity and broader categories. So let me know what you think. I'm not attached to being right or wrong in any of these. The first seemed to be, what are the roles and responsibilities? We've got CPAC, school committee, and school administration. I put regarding CPAC's role to the community just because school committee and school administration have lots of roles and responsibilities that aren't necessarily present here. I don't know to what extent we necessarily need to talk. If they're pertinent, by all means, bring them in. But I was thinking partially what we're really trying to do is figuring out how do all of you sort of work together and what are the roles and responsibilities of each entity regarding CPAC. Given your roles and responsibilities and the different interests of the community and the different interests of the children that you're each holding, because you're holding the general category, but you all have like special particular ways in which you're doing that. How do you actually do that work together? The main categories that I heard, there's around communication and meetings, social media, and shared information, data, and metrics. So one of my questions is, have I missed anything like really materially or that falls outside of these categories? And then how can you best support one another in the work that you're doing? Which we might sort of get with some of this, but I think sort of just this idea of being mutually supportive of each other. If there's anything we can work towards that end, towards the end of the conversation, let's by all means make sure that we do that. So our first conversation. Does this frame our conversation well? Is there something that's missing? Is there some way I've stated something that you feel doesn't capture your perspective or hold your perspective in a useful way? What do I do with the silence? Does the silence mean agreement? Or does silence mean...
It looks reasonable to me.
Okay.
We're all stepping back.
You're all stepping back. School administration sound?
Sure.
Yeah? Okay. All right. Maybe we should start first with sort of roles and responsibilities. Where do we start with that?
From CPAC's perspective, our role is to advise the school committee on matters that pertain to the education and safety of students with disabilities. So,
What does advise mean?
well, that's kind of where
I think that's the nugget, isn't it?
gets us
Yeah.
where we're at, because I don't think we've had an advisory role, and we know now that we need that role. And I feel like it serves the families of this community best if everyone can work together.
So you say you don't feel like you've had an advisory role? Okay.
We thought we were in the loop.
Yeah.
We were not in the loop.
Well, let me ask you this. What would you, what aspect of your advisory role would you like to see filled or done differently going forward?
We need better communication and we need access to information to be able to advise. You can't advise if you have no information.
Okay. Okay. Let me just check in
We're
with some other
not
people.
voting on anything, we're
Yeah.
advising.
Right.
What people do with that advice, they can, they can take that advice and decide to do something with it or not. But we need to have the opportunity to say what the community is feeling.
Okay, thank you. Anybody from CPAC have anything, an additional point that Jen didn't touch on that you feel is pertinent?
The language that Jen used is straight from the legislative guidance on CPAC. And it says, straightforward, meeting regularly with school officials to participate in the planning, development, and evaluation of the school committee's special education programs. And so that's
Great. Thank you. Other thoughts from other folks at the table?
So I'll jump in. I think I agree with the importance of us working together, and this is why this meeting really felt like it was a good kind of launching point for us to kind of form how we're going to work together and what that will look like going forward. I think the advise piece is really, we need your advice. There are a lot of, not just special education students, but students who are both on 504s and IEPs, that there are things that we might not have the full lens on, and hearing from you guys is important. In terms of the school committee's role, the primary things that we do that would relate to that would be policy, and making sure that our policies are supportive of all of our students and what needs to be in place for them in the budget. So those are our two key things. In terms of the advising piece, it's not the same as substituting our judgment, and I think that's a piece that I would like to kind of just hold on to, is that we want to hear from you, we want to hear from other stakeholders as well, but certainly I think we have room to make that roadmap of how does the communication look like, how do we meet, how often do we meet, who's at the meetings, which meetings. I've been in the district, I've had kids in the district for a long time, and I've seen a lot of kind of ups and downs and some things that work better than others, and I'm hoping that we can pull together not just the best practices we've had in the past, but what needs to be kind of put out to pave the road forward. That would be my vision. I know you were going to say something before I cut you off.
Yeah, no, I was just going to follow up on the advising piece, just to kind of get more understanding there, because I think when I think about what the school committee does, we do a lot of maybe identifying indicators of a problem, like in data, or something that we can see in our observable metrics, or from community members, or whatever that we hear could be potentially, a concern, or then we ask about it. We kind of bring forward like the why we need action and like the when we need it kind of pieces, but we don't say who's going to address it, how is it going to get addressed, what is going to be done, because we are told, and accurately so, that we are not educators in the district, so we sort of are on that advising edge in our own right, in terms of seeing things and wanting change, but not really able to say how. And we don't say how. We ask for the district to figure out, yes, that's a problem, no, that isn't, and here's why. And then if it is an agreed concern, what is done about it is really under Dr. Kavanaugh. And so then our third job is evaluating Dr. Kavanaugh. So we, doing her superintendent evaluation, where we can see, like, did our issue make it into a goal, or is it reflected in one of the indicators that we hold her accountable to from DESE? So I guess I'd like to, I know what we do, and I know what our parameters are, and I know that we can't get into the hows, because that's not what we do. In reading the MGL language on what CPAC does, it's less clear to me on what that actually interprets into. So I guess I'd be curious to have that conversation, because that's advising, I get, but then on programs I'm thinking, ooh, school committee doesn't do that. Like, I know that we don't do that, and so I guess I'm wondering what the viewpoints, I'm looking to learn, like, what that means. And I don't know who has an opinion, but I know I don't know.
In the statute, if I don't want to interrupt, but it is the advising the school committee and meeting regularly with school officials. So there are two prongs to the language in the Mass General Law.
Yeah, which we also do, but again, it's more about the why, what we see is, like, why we need action and when. Like, we think it's urgent, whatever.
Do you want to speak to some of those?
Sure, I'd be happy to talk a little bit, and I think I can build a little bit off of what both Nancy and Amanda have just said. I think we need to define our terms tonight, because if we're going to talk about programs, we need to know what programs mean. And I worry a little bit that we're not sure if programs means, I don't want to conflate programs with things like operations. I don't want to conflate programs with staffing. I don't want to conflate programs with teacher training. And I think that's the hows that Amanda was just talking about. So we have to be very careful that when we talk about programs, we probably don't mean things like teacher training or staffing or service delivery, those kinds of pieces. And I think that that's some of what we have to talk about tonight at the table. Mm-hmm. Because we can all read the MGL, but I think that we need to come to a common understanding of what it really means.
Yeah. I think that the language is clear. What does it mean and how does it come to life? And Hopkinton is the part that, like, some pieces need some clarification. Mm-hmm. So what does that? What does that mean? What does that mean to folks?
The regular meeting piece, not to jump ahead too far,
Yeah,
but
go
I
ahead.
know I'm jumping both ahead and back a bit. I know that it used to be that, Dr. Zaleski, that you met with the CPAC chair and vice chair monthly? Is that?
Are you talking past or present?
In the past, like back, so we've had a couple different.
Right, so we've had, ebbs and flows in terms of membership. But we currently, I'll say up until our budget process, we meet and we still do, but we meet and we plan our annual calendar, our CPAC calendar. We plan family events. I keep communication via email. For instance, I just received an email from CPAC about putting out a memo to parents about a coffee hour. So we have that ongoing collaboration and communication. So that hasn't stopped and remains intact. And if we want to get to the nitty-gritty around programming and advisory, we have our 18 to 22 program, which CPAC serves on that advisory committee. So that's an example of programming. And to Dr. Kavanaugh's point, when I think of programming versus operations, I think of program like the 18 to 22 program. We have co-teaching programming in our district. We have inclusion support in our district. So when I think of special education and advising on those things, on those matters, it's looking at our different programs, pre-K to 12. Pre-K is another program, right? And discussion around how are we supporting that program, staffing, our consultancy, things like that. When I think of anything outside of that, and this is just my interpretation, certainly we can discuss this tonight, and to Dr. Kavanaugh's point, operations is something separate. personnel decisions, shifting of staffing, budget, that's operational. Exercising our collective bargaining rights within the contract as administrators to shift staff, for instance. So those, to me, are operational things that are outside the scope of advisory to, programmatically, how are we best servicing the students' needs. But anyway, that's a long way for me to go to say, in my viewpoint, our collaboration as a CPAC board from 2015 till now, and again, it's ebbed and flowed with different membership, has been around planning our annual calendar, planning events and activities for families, in the back and forth email dialogue and answering questions as they come up. And then, I put things out on my listserv because I have access that CPAC doesn't have to the whole parent community to keep them abreast on topics that are important. And I still do that.
At one point, I know the pandemic shifted things a little bit. The entire school committee would have, I think, annual meetings with CPAC, and I'm jumping ahead on the agenda, but I do think that having these meetings where the school committee we all come with different backgrounds in terms of what our awareness is, to have those discussions. It was an important thing in the past that we had to move away from the pandemic and whatnot, but I would think there are more opportunities for us to hear than what we're currently doing. And we want to talk about what makes sense to you guys, certainly.
Well, what are some of because meetings was definitely a piece of how it comes to life. What are the types of meetings that you feel that you could say, in any given year, these are sort of like the standing kinds of meetings that we typically would have with CPAC in regards to CPAC, and who would be present with those and what would be the purpose? Could we get I think maybe just getting some agreement on some of that could be potentially helpful.
Like frequency-wise?
Well, what are the types of, I'm assuming there are different kinds of meetings that might have different types of frequencies. Like there might be just meetings with the school committee, or meetings maybe just with the director of student services, or where you're raising things that you've heard in the community. What are the types of meetings maybe that you've had in the past that you'd like to reinstate doing now that we're hopefully sort of over the hump with the pandemic? What might be some things that you feel now that you have sort of much more of a center of gravity of membership and things have been going, do we want to make sure that we sort of like institutionalize and to say like every November we have a meeting on X with A, B, and C present?
Well, I think that monthly meetings between CPAC and the head of special education and a school committee member, we could start with that as a standing meeting, and then depending on how things go, we could scale that back to once every 2 months. But I think for the short term, I feel like a monthly meeting would be beneficial.
I think that's a great idea. And I, as the current liaison, I would be more than happy to come to any and all meetings that people would like me at. I think monthly is a good way to start, and more is better, I think, right now.
And do you fill the role of the director of special ed?
I do.
You do, okay. Thoughts on that?
I'll meet as often as everybody would like. I have no problem meeting with anybody in this room. I enjoy our meetings. We do have our monthly meetings, which are more workshop-based that we've planned together. I just need to understand the meeting purpose and who's setting the agenda for those meetings.
Yeah, that's a great question.
So I think that is important, but I think, meeting is a good thing. It's always a good thing to collaborate and communicate, but again, I need to understand the purpose. Because up to date, we've met for the purpose of planning and for professional development and parent and community workshops. So I just need to understand the purpose of the monthly meeting, so I'm prepared.
Mm-hmm. No, fair question. Are you thinking in terms of the purpose, Nancy and Jen or other people, more than what was just articulated, or?
I think the purpose is just to see where we're at with the department what parents are saying in the community, what feelings, what questions we might have, what things you might need to tell us to communicate to families, that sort of thing.
Who will own the meeting in terms of setting the agenda and securing maybe the space? Maybe those are two separate roles. I generally find in my experience if somebody you have like sort of one owner for the meeting, you're much more likely for it to happen and to happen well. Who would that rest with? And who has it historically rested with, and was that working well?
Historically, that's before my time,
Okay.
because we didn't have monthly meetings, or, it was more of a casual relationship. I was trying to build CPAC up from the pandemic and,
Right.
a loss of membership and that sort of thing, so we were trying to build it, and it was more of a casual relationship between CPAC and administration, as well as CPAC and school committee, so.
And look at, you
formalizing
have
that.
4 people here all with roles for CPAC, so that looks like some good building.
So far, so good.
So far, so
There's
good.
actually 2 more, but they were not able to make it tonight.
Yeah. But does anybody know who historically owned that meeting?
I don't know who owned it, but I do know that the school committee, that would be a new piece that I think would be a great piece to add in, to have the school committee liaison working in that group. So that, I can tell you, it was not the school committee that owned the meeting.
Okay.
And I guess when I think of owning a meeting, it would be more of making sure that it happens on a regular basis, to make sure, oh, hey, Thursday morning, are we on for whatever, or whatever the day is. But that would be my vision, and I would expect or hope that there would be things that each group had that they might want to bring to that meeting, and maybe could give some kind of a heads up of, oh, hey.
Submit agenda items, that
Yeah,
sort of thing.
yeah, exactly, so that everybody can be prepared. I know sometimes you guys are able to take the temperature of the community differently, and to bring that piece on whatever is expected, and you have access to many more people by email than certainly the school committee doesn't, and CPAC has a bigger list than I do personally, so.
So I'm hearing that the monthly meetings would be a standard time to raise something that has come up, on a
Just so
regular
everyone's on the
basis.
same page.
Yeah, I think I also heard the pulse of the community. So for me, for us, before we go into things like establishing goals or goals for ourselves, or there's sort of a time, there's a cadence to the work of the school committee, and so in advance of some of the things that we do, it'd be nice to have. I know some districts do quarterly meetings where CPAC comes to the school committee. For us, I'd want to put them far enough in advance of a thing that we're doing, if it's relevant, so that we could have, either it's twice a year or 4 times, whether quarterly or twice a year, either one is a step up from ad hoc, which is where we are. So I do think, while it's great to have a liaison in the working meetings, I think it's useful to school committee to have sort of a regular readout, or feedback on top issues that you guys are hearing, so that all the committee members can hear what you're hearing, what you're seeing.
Yeah, we could send out topics and get feedback from members and be able to present. Yeah, absolutely.
It used to be, I do too, it used to be also that the school committee actually attended a CPAC meeting, so that it would be like a broader group, that it wouldn't just be your board, but there might be topics that you would be discussing that would be important for us to hear. And I would envision, if we were doing quarterly or something, that we might kind of flip back and forth between, to hit different styles of having a meeting, and making sure that we're able to.
It'd be really nice to have even an annual or biannual roundtable where CPAC community members could come and ask questions, kind of like a listening session sort of idea, but more formal, I guess.
Yeah.
To the school committee?
To administration, school committee, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So something like this with more, anybody from CPAC who wanted to come, and some more dialogue than what public comment might allow in a typical kind of meeting.
Yes, because at public comment you can speak, but you can't have it back and forth, right? It'd be nice to be able to ask a question and get an answer. Or I'll get back to you on that, or, whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so am I correct in my hearing three things? One, a monthly meeting that's not necessarily a public meeting that includes a CPAC representative, the school committee CPAC liaison, the director of student services. The purpose is, sounds like information exchange, sort of like questions and dialogue, and that I'm hearing someone will be responsible for creating an agenda, so like, just so that nobody's taken by surprise, like that, I don't know, the director of student services wants to have a question, or you're hearing things in the community to alert the director of student services so she can like come with whatever might be helpful to answer some questions to the best of your ability to do that. As a standing thing, we'll figure out who's responsible for that. CPAC presenting to school committee. And Amanda, did you mention a time frame on that?
I don't have a good feel for what the right time is. I think there are, one or two times in our cycle of work that would make sense. Like I said, I looked at other communities and I saw that some do it quarterly, some do it twice a year, even once a year. I think was where we used to be. We had annual.
Yep.
So I'm open, but I think we should plan for, an official invite where CPAC comes to the school committee.
I like that idea.
Is it possible to pick like maybe what the first one would be, and then part of the agenda of that first meeting could be figuring out what the cadence is? So we don't have to figure out the whole cadence right now, but at least we get like a target on the book so that you've got something that's actionable when we leave, more actionable than.
If I were gonna like throw out an idea, I'm just spitballing,
Yeah.
jumping. I would say like at least sort of when we have the year in review, which is after the end of the year as we're looking ahead over the summer toward goal setting and whatnot, like sort of somewhere in between, so we can hear the year in review. We will have received the year-end reports on accountability and everything. We get a whole bunch of reports and things that we check, metrics that we check. So after that, so somewhere between June and September, I think. I don't
So
know
like
what you
a
guys think.
summer and a winter?
And then maybe in January, like maybe one summer, one January-ish, yeah. Or I don't know.
Is that, yeah, if you're in a budget cycle every January?
Well, the budget cycle starts in September, October. So, I mean, an August meeting would actually feed into budget, sadly, because budget never seems to stop.
Is August, my experience is that lots of people are away in August. This can be a difficult month to schedule.
June, we could do June. I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think?
I'm only away when ESY is off, so
Okay.
I'll be here otherwise.
Yeah, oh, okay.
So
Okay.
But what do you guys think about having CPAC at a meeting?
I love it. Yeah, it's we used to have CPAC come to meetings. Well, I'm probably going back like 5 or 6 years now, but still, it was kind of a regular thing. And then you may have been the liaison then too. But the
It was
meetings
not, actually, in the
happened-
beginning.
No, okay, so I don't remember who it was, but the CPAC meetings happened fairly regularly. We attended. I guess in those 3 years, I think I attended 2, but I missed one of them. So I think they were
They were in late
annual?
spring.
Yeah.
And that was when we went to the CPAC meeting.
Right. So-
And the agenda was, I think, planned in ways that it could highlight important things for the school committee to
consider
to be
for-
aware
yeah,
of, right? I
yeah.
know, one of the issues that I can think of that was ongoing at the time was transportation.
Mhm.
And that was something that was important
I feel like
for
that
us to
never goes
hear.
away.
It doesn't entirely, but it feels like it takes on new iterations.
Yeah, that's true.
Little
I like
wrenches.
that timing, though. I think it's like that May, you
Mhm.
said,
Yeah.
I think that makes sense, because that's kind of when we're, kind of reflecting and looking forward.
Mhm.
Like how we do and what can we do moving forward.
Right.
Planning for the next year.
Yeah.
I think that like this is what we thought would happen, what happened from your perspective, right? That's very valuable moving into a new school year and the previous.
And that could have been the rationale for why they had it at that
Yeah.
time back then too. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't remember, but.
Can I clarify? So I can't tell, I know we have 3 different meetings kind of in the flip chart. But it sounds like there's a 4th type being discussed of school committee joining a CPAC meeting, which is a different thing.
That
Are we
could-
talking about CPAC presenting to the school committee or the roundtable? I just want to make sure I understand. There's a
I
lot on
think
that
the middle
flip
one
chart.
could go in either direction.
Yeah.
Like, I think we could go to you, like, if that makes
Right.
more sense, but I think we'd want to post it, like. so
Yes,
that
if
we
all
can
5 of us are
attend.
there. But I know vested, I don't have to have my way certainly, but to me, it would seem like it would be beneficial to do it if we were going to do 2 a year, to do one where we go to one of your meetings and one where you guys come to one of our meetings. And to explore, and then maybe as it evolves, we say, well, this worked better than that, or, I don't know, do you guys have a?
Yeah, well, we could do our, like, our annual meeting in June. We could do a big meeting
Yeah.
and invite you guys and that sort of thing. Try.
May I just chime in?
Please.
June is a tough month on the administration side.
Okay,
I will say.
that's good.
As I'm thinking, I don't have my calendar in front of me, but there's numerous commitments that are running through my mind, ranging from obviously our high school graduation, with my end of the year reporting and responsibilities, closing out with my team. People are going away. I'm in between the end of the school year and the start of the ESY and all of that planning. So I'm just going to put it out there. I prefer May. We've historically done it in May for that, end of the year kind of wrap up. That way we can take a breath, tend to our end of the year responsibilities, and then certainly mid-year anytime. And I think the winter makes sense because it's really like a mid-year check-in at that point. But on the administration side, knowing the responsibilities, I feel like May is better.
How does May sound to others?
So after the election? See, so.
It would, yes. Well, the election is, town meeting's the first week of May. The election's the 3rd, is that right?
I think so.
I think so.
When are your new committee members sworn in?
Immediately.
That day.
Oh, that day. Oh, really?
The next day, maybe.
Oh.
Yeah.
They don't let them get away.
Yeah, right. They're in.
Because
Because they become effective as soon as the election's over.
Oh,
So
really? Oh, it's
it-
different in Maynard. We've got like there's a long, we've got a much longer period of time before between the election and people are sworn in.
So does, and I don't have a,
We could look towards the fall then.
Well, no, I like May. It's a good time. It's a natural time.
When is the town election? Is there like a third
Like
week?
the third week of May, yeah.
17th-ish?
So it's a Monday, right?
Yeah.
So the
So
Monday
when
is the 15th.
What was that? What'd you say?
The third Monday in May is the 15th.
This year.
This
Oh,
year.
yeah. Okay.
And even if it's a new iteration of the school committee, I think it still would be good for the new members to hear what was done in the year prior and what sorts of things everyone's hoping for in the coming year. Probably more important than someone who might not be running again to hear that stuff. So it could be right after the election, and that could be a good way to indoctrinate them right at the get-go too.
Yeah.
Get them in, get them, yeah,
welcome.
exactly. But I
Yeah,
think
just-
that it makes good sense for the person who's going to be doing the work to be present.
to understand it right from the get-go.
Right.
Yeah.
Karen, does the end of May meet your interest? Is that a?
Certainly, I just know June is quite hectic
Yeah.
as I'm closing out with my team. People are getting ready to go away. Sometimes, most times, the folks that are working ESY directly with me only have that 1 week break in between, and I don't want to glut anybody's schedule up, including my own,
Yeah.
as I'm trying to balance all of this. So at any time in May really makes sense. Whatever works, if we feel like the end of May is the best, I'm happy to certainly accommodate that.
The week,
So the first school committee meeting after the election is May 25th.
it could be before
Just so
that. I mean,
everybody
it
knows.
doesn't have to be before or after the school committee meeting. I don't. It could be in it, because it'll be in addition to.
You think it's something in addition to? Okay.
It would give us more time, I think, if we did it in addition to, rather than setting it as like a small agenda item in a big meeting.
For the
Right.
CPAC.
To go
Just for-
on to,
Right,
yeah.
like what they're
Oh,
seeing.
okay, so
Where-
I'm
which
thinking
one-
the other way
where are we
around.
talking about?
I'm not thinking of the school committee presenting, the CPAC presenting to the school committee.
You're thinking of the roundtable?
I'm thinking,
No.
or
I don't
of
think
us
so.
going to a CPAC meeting.
I
Okay.
think it's the fourth option.
The
that's
fourth,
not there.
yes,
Yeah.
thank you, Jamie.
Okay.
Uh,
Which is school committee goes to CPAC meeting?
Yes.
And so school committee, that also then includes administration going as well at the same time?
I
Is
would
that- am I
think,
right in
that's
that
the way it was
assumption or
done
no?
historically. I don't, it gives us all the opportunity to, and I know the week of graduation is tough for the entire administration, and that, I know graduation's the 2nd of June. The school
Yeah,
committee
so the
meeting must
last
be the
week
week
of May is
before.
gonna be
Yeah.
like the week before, which might be a difficult time. I don't know.
We're getting to be pros at twice a week meetings, actually.
Okay.
And we could do this if, I mean, we're a board, so even
Yeah.
though we switch members, we still represent a one unit, you know, so we
Right.
could do the second week, like after town meeting week, the second week of May. It would be
We-
the old members.
We could, and we could invite potentially people who are running. I don't know what makes sense to you guys. I'm looking to you just because I want to do what makes sense for.
Yeah, I think before trying to avoid like Memorial Day weekend,
Yes.
right? And so I think I don't have a predilection for pre or post election. That doesn't really, that's not weighing heavily on me.
It'd be nice to hear what people have to say, though.
To hear the new,
Well, yeah.
the post-election.
Or before the election, to hear what the
Oh, to
candidates
let
have
them-
to
Yeah.
say.
That's, might be a good opportunity.
To speak
To
to their
invite them.
special education.
Jen will only have a few more links left on our paper chain.
It's a tough one over here. Yep.
So you lost me a little bit. We've got school committee going to a CPAC meeting, and is this the May meeting that we're talking about?
It would be the week between town meeting and the town election, so it's the 2nd week of May. would be
Okay,
the-
so second week of
Is
May.
that
Good for you guys.
And what's the purpose of, if we were to capture this purpose here, what would be that purpose?
It sounds like what have we done, what went well, what do we want to look at going forward, right? Sort of a recap, assessment,
Like a state of the union of CPAC.
a current state.
Sorry, so what did we done, what went well?
What would we like to do going forward?
So the week of May 8th to the 12th, somewhere in there. That's what we're looking at, yes?
Yep, so between town meeting
And this is town meeting.
yep,
Okay.
sure is.
So sort of what I'm hearing is a year-end review, but also a preview of the coming year.
Okay. Who owns this meeting?
CPAC can own that.
Okay. Year-end review and look at coming year.
So for us, that's more of a listening, you know, we're gonna hear from you what's worked and what hasn't. I like that.
And I think it would be helpful if there's any specific things that you want information on, that you get that to either the administration or us. You know, give like a week time to sort of prepare so that when we come, we can
And vice
give you
versa,
what
if
you
there's
need,
something
yeah.
you need from us.
Right, yeah.
Good idea.
Like a little bit of warning so that, I mean, stuff could come up, but, you know, just the things that you know are probably gonna come up, it would be
Yeah.
helpful to have that ahead of time.
So that'll be then an agenda, like just so you get sort of key topics and things like
Yeah.
a week
Yeah.
ahead of time.
Yeah.
Okay. And,
And because it would be if the school committee is there, it would be a public meeting that we would need
Right.
to announce and post the agenda
Post it,
through Elaine Lazarus at Town Hall.
okay. And what's the school administration's role in this particular thing, if any? I don't want to make something up that doesn't need to be there.
Same, I think it's mostly just a listening.
Listening,
session.
I think.
Yeah, and I'm happy to bring information that might be pertinent to, you know, the content of the meeting.
Okay, so then I guess a week ahead of time, whoever on your end is coordinating that would dialogue both with the chair of the school committee and the superintendent about here's the information that would be helpful for the main topic so that they can come prepared for that, right? Okay. Plus the superintendent. Anything, and is this the one that is, oh, and then, so the other meeting in the winter, CPAC would come to school committee, is that what you're thinking. So is that the present to school committee piece here, or is that a different piece than what we're talking about?
I feel like that's it. Do you? Yeah.
Yeah, so this would be a winter meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. You want to pick a month? Which you can discuss here, but like, you just want to put a target on it, or?
February might be better than January because January, I think we meet once or twice a week already. So if we push it out to February, when's budget usually due? Like the third week in January-ish? If we push it out to either the last week of January or first week of February.
That's getting awfully close together.
So
Right.
the other way that we could flip it to go ahead of when we get into the multiple meetings.
Right, like, because it seems like going February, March, and we're meeting in May.
So maybe the end of October. Does that,
Yeah, it feels
Oh, I
like if we're
see what you're
trying
saying.
to
yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Does that make sense
this way.
to you guys in terms of having a meeting, CPAC coming here the end of October?
If that's before the time when all of the directors and building principals come and present their budgets, that seems like the most opportune time.
I was thinking usually that's early November that we have our first
Yes.
presentations. So maybe our second meeting in October. Or first, depending on what works for people's schedules.
So sometime in October, before you start getting into all the building presentations and other stuff around the November timeframe, right? Okay.
And can I just ask the purpose of the October meeting, just so I'm clear?
Yep, I think that's a great question. How would you articulate the purpose of this?
I think it's a check-in. I mean, I think we will have had some conversations in May. We will have done goals. We will be going into budget season. So I think there's probably a mutual, it's probably not just one way, it's probably a mutual sharing of where we are.
And as I read the law in your bylaws, part of what I think I picked up on, and if I misread it, let me know, was really that you are very much sort of the conduit from this particular group of parents, and sort of your ear is much closer to the ground. So there could be like that really beneficial role of like, here's what we're hearing, here's how people are reacting, here's like the talk on the streets that could be just really helpful for everybody and understanding. That could be like one piece that you could really bring in terms of like the intel, use the intel, if you will, or the voice of the parents.
Yeah, identifying systemic challenges.
Yeah. So it would be for CPAC to present, and not only challenges too, but like if things are going well, that could be something that would be really nice to present too. But just sort of like, what's that parent perspective and how are things going, the challenges, both the things that are going well, to maybe raise some questions, potentially for school committee to ask some questions as well to get a sense of where things are. But mostly, is this meeting then mostly about CPAC bringing, here's our understanding, here's what we're hearing, here's what's going on in this community that we have a special relationship with, that's helpful to you, and then there's dialogue. Is that a sufficient purpose? Does that meet your interest in that question, or is there still something remaining for you?
I guess I'm just trying to understand how this relates, how this differs from the monthly meetings.
Oh, good
So
question.
If the
Yeah.
monthly meetings are to talk about things that come up or things that are happening in the district, to keep everybody apprised, what are we anticipating October is going to shed light on?
Well, the
I'm
monthly
ju-
meetings are not a public meeting. They're not with the entire school committee. So it's a totally different setting.
I understand setting, I'm trying to understand content.
With the public as opposed to.
Right, just the
Yeah.
content, like what are we hoping for in October?
Would
Be
it be a
similar to
summary?
the other times that I've come before school committee with a presentation.
Right.
Similar sort of idea.
So it's more of a presentation?
But like, I think a public presentation, so it means you're having these conversations that aren't open meetings. This would be an open meeting where the public could come, where CPAC presents, here's the parent perspective, things that are going well, some challenges that we're facing, some questions that we have, and then it sounds like there's potentially dialogue here.
I think the dialogue is great, and to me, I think also having the full school committee is helpful. Kind of like when you have come, it's been not as well planned, not as
Not as frequent,
predictable.
probably.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, it's not been as predictable. That if we know we have that opportunity coming up, there might be the opportunity to have the conversation in the smaller meeting that happens before the bigger meeting to think about what would be helpful for people to hear on both ends, and then bring it here. Does that?
So there'd be redundancy. So, right? There'd be, it would be setting what will basically be discussed to some extent. So there won't be surprises at the public meeting.
You wouldn't expect there to be if everyone's on the same page
Right.
and communicating. Nothing should come as a surprise. It's more a presentation so that the community can tune in and kind of see where we're at.
Know that we're all working together.
So I do want to bring up something historically. I think when we've had, for the last 7 years, I think Dr. Zaleski and I have been attending meetings with CPAC, obviously. She's attended way more of them than I ever have. But I think that we thought hard about negotiating some of the topics that would come up at those meetings. So, for example, and this maybe goes back to our conversation about what do we mean by advising, what do we mean by program. I'm hearing language like we want to hear what parents are thinking. We want to hear parents' voices. We've talked about things like systemic challenges. We've talked about advisory, and I just want to be very careful about what it is that we think are acceptable topics for those meetings, because we have had, and I think Amanda touched on this a little bit earlier tonight, she talked about what matrix and what data do we have to support some of those conversations. Because in past years, we've had a single parent come to a meeting and say, this is the situation with my particular child in this particular setting in regard to that particular service, for example. And I think that it became an unfortunate setting, because that's not a setting where you have a conversation with a parent about that person's service delivery and that person's child and the child's abilities or disabilities. So I do worry that we need to be able to define a little bit more carefully what's going to happen in terms of the agendas and the topic. And maybe that's what you were getting at, but I'm not sure. But I just want to make sure that we're not talking about, things that become, things that belong under the label of operations or service delivery, because those aren't topics that would be appropriate for that. And I think we'll all be better served tonight if we have this conversation here.
Are you meaning more themes and trends as opposed to specific child issues? Are you interested more in hearing the themes and trends of the CPAC community? But I get what you're saying. You don't want to have a potentially, like a FERPA violation of a specific child's situation, right? Is that what you-
Sure. I guess a good example, Dr. Zaleski raised it earlier. We had talked a little bit about the 18 to 22 program.
Right.
That's a program.
Yeah.
And if we say, what would be really nice is if we got our 18 to 22 students out more into, college settings. And how can we work on that together? That to me says you are thinking about growing a program. You need the help of the administration, the support of the school committee. All of that makes great sense to me. And so I just, maybe that's just one example, but I just want to make sure that we know what kinds of agendas we're putting forward, so that we're not caught in a place where we say, next May or next October, we don't really talk about that in that setting. Or I just want to make sure we all know what's appropriate. I really do. I think we're going to make sure that we all have a definition here tonight that works.
Yeah, I think that's a great
Well said.
question. Thoughts on that?
I think that CPAC serves the larger community of parents of children with special education needs. And so we don't come to meetings with one parent's story of one child. That's why we are interested in the themes and the data for groups, not individuals. Mm-hmm. And I think that data and matrices, like the information, is something that is really important to us to have access to. Like that's really our one of our top priorities.
Can I just ask clarification on what you mean by that? Matrices on what specific
Oh, well,
data? I'm just wondering.
I was repeating someone else's
Okay.
words. But data, yeah, like we're looking for CPAC to have access to information about FTE records, historical data for OT, PT, speech, guidance, social work, paras, reading specialists, the number of students receiving services, things that CPAC requested before, and I think weren't being tallied. And so it would be a great time to start now. Like, what's past is past, and if we can work together and build this library of information, it helps us have the data to do a wellness report and evaluation of how things are going with numbers. Because we know that we didn't have it before, that's fine. So now we can move forward with that and start collecting it.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
So like if we see, say, trouble in the math program, I always put the math program. If we hear from people that we need more differentiation in fourth grade or whatever it is, we might bring that forward and say, you know, we're hearing about a need. We're not asking for, you know, a certain head count. You know what I mean? Like the FTE part is a little bit weird for me, because I think what I would expect to hear from CPAC, what I would hope to hear from CPAC is, you know, we're hearing that a lot of students are having difficulty navigating the lunchroom because it's whatever, that was something, and then we turn that issue over and you figure out how to verify that there is a problem. And then if there is, solve it, and then you observe a better outcome. So it doesn't come down to like how many people are monitoring the lunchroom, or, you know what I mean? Like there's a difference between monitoring service, the effective delivery of service and its impact on kids, and getting feedback from families that there's a struggle, there's some gap, and reporting on the gap and allowing the administration to close the gap. And then trusting that will happen, and then verifying with data after. See, that's how we operate. And that's why I was asking in the beginning about like advising.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't tell you put 6 people in the cafeteria sitting, you know, one-to-one with certain students. I have no idea what I'm talking about. Like that would, you know, we just say, hey, there's this issue with the cafeteria with this kind of, these students or whatever. So
Yes,
that's, I guess,
staffing
what I'm trying to
is-
get clarity.
Staffing is operational.
Right.
It's not programmatic.
Right.
And so that's where I see even keeping that data, the answer for me would be to what end? You have no influence over it.
Right, that's where I feel like we had a disconnect in understanding like what insights you guys can bring so that we can amplify the insights that you have and they can address them, and then we can see that the outcomes are better. Like,
So one question that I had around the data is there's definitely data that the school presents regularly to the school committee. And CPAC, as a member of the school community, can come to those meetings and have some, and I guess what is that data that's regularly presented? And where's the opportunity for CPAC to maybe have some conversations beyond maybe just public input or some other discussion around some of the data that you get, so we can have some agreement on what is the shared data, how is it shared, and then what are the conversations that involve CPAC a little bit more? How does that sound as a framing around some of this?
Well, should CPAC be part of the discussion when special education is discussed at school committee? Would it be unreasonable to ask that we be offered a seat at the table when special education is brought up? Just to be able to weigh in on whatever might be discussed. Not to make a vote or anything like that, but just as an advisory council, which is what we're called. Would it be unreasonable to ask that, this Thursday we'll be talking about this? Would you mind coming, and if it's something where we have time to put the question out to the community and have some feedback to give, wouldn't be a bad idea.
So like, for example, and I don't have any new things coming forward off the top of my head, but I'm thinking back, like when we were talking about Unified PE last year, like having you come and express publicly what you've heard in terms of what CPAC's concerns might be regarding the program or regarding.
Right, it could be positive feedback as well. Like it'd be nice before you guys make a decision that you have that information from families that, you know, what do families think? And you're not having to guess.
Well, I think Unified PE is a good example because it's a program, and I think we really have to stick to the idea that is it a program or is it not a program?
Also, I mean, I think that the whole sort of idea of, like, maybe it would make sense for CPAC to have a liaison to the school committee.
Yeah.
And so, in those instances where there is something on the agenda that has something to do with the special education community, the liaison would be here and be able to be the voice. I think if we make it a round table every single time, right, it could be a 9-hour meeting, right? So I think if the liaison would sort of take on the task of gathering the information from the community that's affected and come in and sort of, I mean, you did a great job when you came in and spoke, and you know, you sort of compiled the sort of voices of a big group of people and were able to present it. I think that would really be helpful, because then we kind of make the conversation, we're sort of channeling it and not letting it go off in 14 different directions. We're keeping it specific to the topic that's on the agenda. I mean, I think it would be great to have one point person who's familiar with all the other operations that the school committee is doing too, and can kind of get some perspective. And I don't know. I mean, I know you're still getting things off the ground, but if there were enough people and there was someone who'd be willing to do that, you don't have to stay here till 10 o'clock every Thursday, but you could come and like see the majority of it, you know, and it would be at least, I think, helpful to get some insight.
That's what we do with our liaison roles to the other boards, similarly.
Yeah. And if you miss a meeting, you miss a meeting with our liaison roles. I mean, like, if you do your best, but you have 3 or 4 meetings a week, you might miss one that week. It's okay, but it helps to have a specific point person who's sort of the expert on school committee operations.
I think we would need to discuss that, just because with the challenges of parenting children with special needs, sometimes the load can be heavier some weeks than others.
Right.
And so we might need to figure out, even like identifying a pair, or like, so it's not the same, like, because to guarantee that
Sure, for sure.
like one person might be tricky. And we also want to make sure that we create a lasting framework that supports the entire district going forward, and we're not overcommitting any one piece of CPAC where we would fail on what we want to hold up as our obligation.
Well, would it be every single meeting, or would it just be the meetings that there's a special ed topic?
And that would be your decision too. Yeah, you guys think.
By saying liaison, it implies potentially each time.
Well, you could also look at the agenda that's posted and make a determination whether the topics were relevant to you.
And I think it's important, if I can chime in, because you mentioned lasting framework, which I completely agree with, but I think that's why tonight is really important to determine within that lasting framework, CPAC as the advisory board, when is it appropriate? Because what we don't want to have happen, what I don't want to have happen is we have a liaison to CPAC, and if it was every meeting, and we're in the throes of budget season, and then we're getting into this back and forth, which is really out of the purview of some of the role of CPAC, and it's going to cause a dissension or a disconnect. We don't want to do that. Like, we're here tonight so that does not occur. So I think it's really important, as we're creating that framework, if we're going to have a liaison to CPAC at the table, which I think is fantastic. I think the more collaboration we have as a community, it's going to help all of us in every aspect of our work, in the home, in the school, in the classroom. We need to do this. But we do need to be clear, because we don't want to get into a public debate, especially during the budget season.
Well, what would that look like? If you, in your ideal world, if there was a CPAC liaison that was doing like the best job possible, what would they be doing? What would that look like?
They can come to the table if there's a topic like unified sports, unified basketball, how expanding the 18 to 22 program. Right now we're working on some 14 to 22 initiatives. What does that look like? You know, help us understand. If there's a topic that comes up, because in the past when CPAC would have, maybe they didn't come with specific individual concerns, because Holly, I heard what you said, like, we don't want to violate individual privacy rights of students, sometimes CPAC came forward with bigger global concerns, which quite frankly, I couldn't answer. It was like, what's going on with high school guidance and students with disability? Things like that. If topics like that come up and we have an agenda, then we invite Mr. Bishop. Or we invite Lee Greco, head of guidance. That's, in my mind, again, CPAC as the advisory board to key programmatic things or key questions in the community. And sometimes parents might ask questions, and this is just my experience, and they don't know if it's programmatic or not. But that's where I would rely on CPAC to either reach out to me saying, okay, this is really operational, can you help with this, and have that back and forth, or bring it to a school committee saying, gee, this is a really hot topic, we just need some clarity on that, and having those discussions. To me, that's different than having, and this is why I want to be clear, having an advisor at the table, getting into back and forth dialogue. If we're getting into the trenches of like staffing, or why someone resigned and there's not enough coverage in a particular area, or a budget, things like that, which are not in the purview. So I do think we have to be on the same page tonight about what is in the purview of CPAC and not. Even for these public meetings, as we get into the throes of different operational things.
That is, I guess the issue is we all have kids with special needs, and to us, if someone resigns and my kid doesn't have a para for the rest of the year, that is a huge thing. What if we have enough parents saying these things? Then does that what becomes valid?
Right. So parents certainly, and this is where individual student service delivery comes in. If there's a professional that resigns, which people resign, they move on, resigns in the district, it's our responsibility, my responsibility, in partnership with the building leadership, to ensure that and my team, the team chairs, to ensure that the students are receiving the services that they are receiving. And then we put in coverage to the best of our ability. And then we individually work with families, and especially if there's like providers that are different providers that are covering because someone's out on a leave, we provide notification to the family via telephone, or if it's a big situation where someone's left and it's going to leave a wide gap, I've put out memos in the past. But that's different. That's different than coming to a school committee meeting and saying, Dr. Sleskis, you have 6.2 FTEs, and why are you reducing this to 4.6? Or, geez, help me understand what, like, that's different. I do the public presentation during the budget process. I present to school committee. To Dr. Kavanaugh's earlier point, when it gets down to the nitty-gritty data about how many OTs, PTs, FTE, that is really operational. It just feels, and it kind of goes with your point, Amanda, like you're not asking how many people are in the cafeteria and why we got 6, not 4. You're asking global questions, like, geez, I heard there's a problem in the cafeteria.
If I think I can understand you're raising questions like what happens if there's a staffing change and it directly affects my kid.
No, I mean if it's affecting a lot of kids. Like if when Amanda was saying when people come to the school committee with issues, what if a lot of people come to us with issues and it's directly related to something you're saying is out of our purview, even though it's directly impacting us as parents with kids who have special needs.
And the education and safety of students with disabilities.
Well, it seems like that's part of your role is to bring from the community issues to the administration. And so I think part of the sharing of it, here's what we're hearing. There have been a couple of resignations in the community. Some people are feeling that the coverage, to report that to you, I think is something that's appropriate. But to then have the conversation of where people are allocated is where you're saying, no, your job is to hear, oh my gosh, I'm just going to run with this example. We've had some resignations. Some parents have not been happy with how the coverage has occurred. We're going to take that information, we're going to take a look at it, but there's not a dialogue or a negotiation over how to fix it, because the fix for it is the operational piece. The bringing it from the parents and the community, here's the word on the ground, is the advocacy piece. Is that like, are we agreed on that, or does somebody not think
I think that's a very fair articulation.
Yeah, it's a great articulation, because we don't want to make assumptions that the education and safety of the students are being impacted. People can talk and say a lot of different things, but assumptions shouldn't be made in the community that we're hearing this, therefore it's truth. Bring it to administration and let us work it through with the operational side of things.
Because I would think you'd want, if people are having that conversation, you would want to hear that.
Yes.
In some way, shape, or form.
Right.
But I think you're saying it's the negotiation about how to fix it doesn't necessarily occur in that meeting. How does that sound? So you thought that was a fair formulation. How does that sound to you guys?
It
Not
feels
sure I'm clear.
Yeah, so what it sounds like to me is that from the other side of the table, we're hearing that we are not allowed to ask questions about number of staff, information on data of staffing, that you're saying that that is not allowed. Is that?
I think you can ask those questions, but I just don't think that it falls into the purview of CPAC, so to speak. Like, I don't think that it's something that the CPAC should come and say, you know, we're really upset that there are only 4 people in the cafeteria instead of 6. Now, you know, if it impacts 20 kids who are in the cafeteria because suddenly parents think that the children are unsafe because there are only 4 cafeteria monitors instead of 6, you can give us that information, I think, as Amy Rebecca just said, and we'll take it back and assess whether we believe the kids are unsafe or whether we don't, because we're in those cafeterias every single day. We have the data. We see, you know, discipline reports. We have, you know, behaviors. We know how many kids would, you know, need to have a conversation with an assistant principal, or maybe became dysregulated, or maybe couldn't access learning after lunch. We know that stuff. I think that we can't live with, someone said that there are only 4, so I told my neighbor, and my neighbor filled in a little bit more, and then someone else told, and then when we became very unhappy because there wasn't going to be 5 people in the cafeteria, we took to social media. Like, I don't think that that's going to be helpful in the relationship between CPAC and our public schools.
So if I ask you how many people are in the cafeteria, do I get the information that there's 6, or do I, like, I think that's the piece that's missing here, is that
The reassurance.
Yes,
Yeah,
I don't
like
think
it's
we
a-
have ever
it's-
denied the CPAC any information. In fact, I know that we had reached out and said we would like to meet with you. So yes, we are always open to meetings and open to sharing information that we have. There's some information we don't have.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
Just one thing that, just kind of in looking back where we were talking a few minutes ago, that would feel like a good opportunity to make sure that if there are questions about data, if there are things that you guys want to bring forward that may not be on our school committee agenda, that those are conversations that would happen in the monthly meetings more frequently. If something flags and you guys are hearing something that you want to meet in that smaller group to ask the questions about what the data is, to have the conversation about, on the other side, what the administration's seeing, if that kind of conversation.
if
Does
the
that?
seat's available at the table during a school committee meeting, that agenda item is the only thing that would be brought up
So
in that meeting. So,
a lot of these things don't bubble up to school committee meetings, is what I'm thinking about, is that if we've had resignations in the district, sometimes we're aware of them because we have kids in the system, or because of things that we've heard in individual conversations.
But it's not a regular discussion
It's not a
piece, because that's in
conversation,
the
right.
operations department.
Right, it wouldn't
Yeah.
be something that would be necessarily be here in our regular meeting, but it doesn't mean that we don't have interest in it, you don't have interest in it, and that the conversation can't take place. It just might not be something that's on our agenda. If there are agenda items that are coming up that are related to special education programs and whatnot, I think it might become the expectation of, in my mind, of the school committee liaison to reach out to say, hey, you know, we're talking about a new unified PE course, we're talking about whatever I'm sorry, I keep harping on the same example. But to have the expectation for whoever takes this role as the liaison to CPAC, that when agenda items are coming up, that whoever's identified as the point person, and I totally get not wanting to come to all of our meetings, but that rather than waiting for you to see it on the agenda, to say, hey, Jen or Jamie, or, you know, Erica, whoever the person is, we're going to be discussing this. Do you want to come? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like, is it an honesty?
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's 2 different things. Like, that sounds lovely. Absolutely. Love it. Perfect. I think that what feels like might be the elephant in the room is the discussion about information receiving on our end, and what we're allowed to expect when we ask for it. I think that's something that I feel like we're sort of dancing around it a little bit, and I would just like to know.
How do you define program?
Right, I keep hearing, we're not allowed to ask questions about operations, or we can ask, but we're not going to find out, so, or we'll tell you anything you want. So I think I want to understand that.
See, I don't know, but I would be interested in coming up with how do we know our kids are okay? Like, I think, to me, it's like how the kids are doing is data that I think you'd want to see.
Yeah.
And not like how's curriculum being delivered by 6 people, but I think however the administration is doing the job of delivering services, if the kids are okay in the things that we agree to measure and look at, then we're all okay. If we can, and I totally understand that given specific circumstances, there may be indicators of wellness of kids or programs that are not something we can sit here and define today. It's going to come up in like September, you're going to go, we're hearing this, we'd like to know how this program is doing. Can you give us any metrics on this program or whatever? But to me, it's about how are the kids, and if you're hearing from families that the kids are not okay, and we can ask for, some information that can talk about the kids, and oh, wow, you're right, we did a mental health screen, and this is what we're seeing in this particular subpopulation. You're right, among, even though on the macro level, data looks great, for our kids on IEPs, data doesn't look good. You're right, we missed that. Let's look at that kind of thing. To me, that's where I totally see CPAC and school committee really interested in, the kids. When it comes to how much money are we spending, or which books are we using, or how many teachers, we don't get to weigh in on that, even where we sit. We don't pick curriculum, we don't pick the books, we don't, do any of that, but we track the outcomes. So I don't know if you would agree with that or not, but that's how I see it.
I actually, Amanda, you said exactly what was running through my head, this idea of results and outcomes. And I know the question was brought up, what questions can we ask? And of course, I think we should name, you can ask any question, that's always allowed, so it's important to say that. But what the most productive types of questions are, and Dr. Kavanaugh was talking about operations versus programs, and I think that conversation about the cafeteria and kids being safe is a great example. So the question of, let's keep running with it, right?
Sure.
So,
it's
our example.
Right. So, there's probably a much deeper example, but we'll go with this one. So, are there 4 teachers in there? Are there 97 teachers in there? That might not be the most effective question, but the most effective question would be, to Amanda's point, are the kids safe? Are they having a productive, inclusive, beneficial, enjoyable lunch experience? And if the answer is no, either because of reports home from children, or as parents, as an organized group are learning, then that's the item to bring up. And I really feel like that's where the advisory word comes to life. Because all of a sudden you're advising, and you're an extra set of eyes, and you're saying, we've heard, or we have reason to believe, that this is what's going on. And we're advising you of that because you need that information. And we talked about assuming positive intent. We assume that you're going to take that information and you're going to make it right for our kids in any way that you can. So I think that's probably, as I listen to this, I think that's kind of what I'm hearing could be a really good way to split those two things out. And again, focus on the results and the outcomes.
May I ask a question? So if we're hearing from 5, 6 families that their children are having a terrible lunch experience, so if we're using that example, and we say that in a meeting with Karen, what happens next? Are we hearing, are we sharing details of what families have shared with us? Are we discussing options? Are we hearing what the current plan is, and where might the holes be? Are we participating in that conversation? Are we hearing updates on things that are going to be tried to change? Or is that all behind closed doors? Because I think that's where...
Yeah. Let me take off my assistant superintendent hat and I'll put on my old elementary school principal hat. And, because, as an elementary school principal, as any principal, you really are on the front lines of hearing from parents, general ed, special ed, everyone in between, sometimes parents of kids not even at your school who have ideas. And I think it's really important to think that, for me as a principal, one of my practices was to make sure that either if I say I'm going to get information back to you, I do that. And so whether or not it's one of us, if in one of these monthly meetings, maybe something is brought up and there's an agreement that's made, let me get back to me. Or, one thing that I often say is, let me know if you see that what I've promised is going to happen doesn't happen. I say that a lot now in my work. I'm going to fix this. And if you see that I haven't fixed it, you need to let me know. And I think that that's a powerful, not only message, but really relationship building bridge. And we talked about trust too, and I think that's an important element of that too. So I don't know if I've answered your question with crystal clarity, but I'm just speaking for myself that might be something. I can't speak for Dr. Zaleski, who would be often the administrator in a meeting like that.
I mean, my opinion on it, we'll stick to the cafeteria example, but if 5 to keep at it.
We're gonna
5
be
to
that.
6 students, families, saying the cafeteria is unsafe and it's not properly staffed or supervised, and CPAC brings that to my attention. My first question is going to be, what building? What dates is this occurring? Is this ongoing? Have you heard it just like, did it happen after February break? Has it happened since September? I need that information. My next phone call, and to Jeff's point, is I'm calling the building principal because he's in charge of the operations for the building. And in my response to CPAC would be, thanks for the information. I need to follow up on this, but I need more information. I need dates. I need how many families. Did any kid report getting hurt? Tell me what happened. I need those details. And then I go to school administration at that point and find out the information. And if it were a special education issue, I'd go to a team chair and find out, geez, I'm hearing this broad-based issue that behavior support's not being implemented in general, for instance. I'd go to the proper person and I'd get the information. And then I'm going to find out, geez, this is occurring, this is not occurring. Oh, well, this occurred once, but we addressed it with that family. I'm not sure why it became a broad-based issue. At that point, when I have that level of information, one or two things happens. If it is a school-wide, building-wide issue that's bigger than me, I would then probably divert back to the principal. I would, and I always do. I would call back the person, the parent, if it was CPAC, and say, I got the information. This is the information I found out. Here's what, Ms. Bolello has said. You're certainly welcome to reach out. She welcomes that. Or, I spoke with Ms. So-and-so, team chair. It seems like this was an individual to a specific student case. Can't speak about that due to student confidentiality, but certainly have that parent reach directly out to the team chair, and certainly I'm happy to attend an IEP meeting. So there's the resolution in it. And that's different than going to the cafeteria example. We really have 6 staff, not 4, and here's why we made this decision about 6 versus 4, and we just have to dispel myths, too, that children aren't safe based on administration's decision-making on staffing, and I have to put that out there. Because I want to make sure that there's no myths perpetuated in the community or on social media that children are unsafe. Based on,
This was a hypothetical.
based on.
Just-
But that's what I'm saying. But moving forward, but that's what I'm saying. Moving forward, still. But moving forward, but this is important because part of our norms in our work together and moving forward is making sure that assumptions aren't out there. They don't come to life as assumptions. That we are able to give real answers with data or with just conversation with the building based or other leaders, and get back, and that information is taken, and then you folks certainly can circle back and say, geez, this is what has happened, or what I heard, or what administration has reported, follow up with the principal, the team chair, or attend an IEP meeting, you're welcome to request that. And to me, that's a great example of advisory, because then an issue's been brought forward, I'm reaching out to the appropriate stakeholders, you're going back and advising the parents on next steps, and then we take it from there, depending on what the issue is, obviously.
And in listening to both Jeff and Karen, I think one thing that's resonating for me is if you come to us and you have questions, whether it turns out that they're operational or they're programmatic, whatever they happen to be, I think that there needs to be a trust that our doors are open and we are very willing to hear those questions and sit in a room and have conversations. And I'm not naive enough to think that if we say, let's have trust, that we're all going to walk out of here tonight feeling that. Trust is only built over time. And so I'm hoping that with an open door policy and with the opportunity to ask any questions that you want of any of our administrators, we're happy to really sit with you, and I hope that over time we can rebuild some of the trust that was lost in the budget season. Because I think that there was trust that existed before the budget season began.
So when we're asking for how many lunch ladies were in that cafeteria last year versus this year, how many students are in that cafeteria last year versus this year, and we ask that question, are we going to get the answer as far as the data? You know, because when you look at data, you can say, oh, okay, well, that's trending, that looks right. And to not know, well, I'm hearing there's 4, but I reached out to administration and they haven't told me one way or the other, it's 4 at 6. I don't know because I don't have that data.
Sure,
So-
we're happy to give you that data.
Right.
Can I ask a question to your question?
Sure.
I guess in the spirit of asking that statistical question, I guess, and I'm going to say it's going to sound gruffer than it's meant to, but I'll ask it. What is the purpose of that question? Because
To be able to visualize if somebody is saying it's dangerous in the cafeteria, hypothetically, right? And we think there might be 4, but we don't know for sure. We want to, is there 4, is there 6? I don't know. How many were there last year? What does that look like over the last 5 years? Just to be able to communicate with families and back it up with data, it's
Like an IEP.
Well, because
Yeah.
I was
So
thinking
now-
like
it's just to be able to look at that over time to know, like, okay, well, that looks like it's trending in the right direction. That
well,
makes sense.
anecdotal stories in a community can really take off like wildfire. And one role you can play as the advisory, one, you can bring the wildfires here and say, this is what we're hearing. And on the other hand, with information from the school administration, you can take some of that data back into the community and say, I know there are a couple of isolated incidents. Here are actually what the trends look like. Here's what the data looks like. Here's what the school is looking at, or some questions that they're asking to work on that problem. And it actually is more like fall leaf burning than an actual, conflagration that they've got there. But I think that the parent advisory though can go. I think part of what I'm hearing can go both ways, right? That if they're bringing stuff to you, and then you've got some data that can say, actually, here's I know we've been hearing some of these stories because the anecdotal data often what people can do too when stress is high is when you don't have information, you fill in the gaps, and it often doesn't look good for the other party. Very rarely do we tell stories that put ourselves in that negative position. It often looks really bad for the other. So you can be a helpful piece of that about what's the kind of conversation in the community. I think I hear part of what you're saying is we can do that better when we have some data to some things. And I think what I hear you saying is please bring it and we'll share with you. We'll do our best to share what we can. Am I hearing correctly? Did I miss it?
Well, I think that
missed
there's just
something.
one missing piece, and that
Yep.
is agreement on the data.
Yes, I
So
was
we
wondering
may
if that's
say
next.
that 4 cafeteria personnel are fine, and it may be the belief that 6 is what you need. And I think that the only way we're going to get to resolution is if we can have a sit down and actually have a conversation face to face about why do we believe 6 is extraneous and why do you believe 6 is necessary? And then I think there are going to have to be times where instead of betraying one another's trust, we just have to agree to disagree. Because I don't necessarily know that it's helpful for the schools to say, oh, well, they don't know what they're talking about, and for CPAC to say, oh, well, they don't know what they're talking about. And I think that at some point we have to say, these are the data, this is why the school is making this choice, and it's operational, and we don't have any information that a child is being harmed or poorly educated. And maybe you will have data that a child is being harmed or poorly educated, and you can bring that. But the disagreement on numbers around, and numbers that don't really tell a story about a program, or don't really tell a story about whether a child is being well educated, or don't really tell a story about whether a child is being harmed, that's when I think we get into very muddy waters and trust erodes quickly.
And that's why I talk about outcomes, because I feel like the resolution to this hypothetical problem I didn't know was going to have the legs like it does, could be that we've assigned buddies to the kids, or they get to go first in line, or they're giving 5 extra minutes at lunch so that they could eat their lunch because they have issues opening their applesauce. Or, like, the resolution may have nothing to do with the numbers. Like, the community may think the answer is X, but the answer, a better answer might have been Y. And so it's hard, like, we have this issue too. Like, when we see a number, it's hard to understand what the story is until we have the narrative, like the whole context of that number. So I think if you're pushing back on the, politely on the, what would you do with those numbers, I think that's probably the why, because the answer isn't the number, it's here's the solution.
Well, I think it's the number and the solution, right? And then that's something that then we can use to re-explain, reframe the wildfire to the fall leaf burning.
And if you have the data that you can look at it, and then you're prepared to go into a meeting to ask intelligent questions instead of being shown a spreadsheet and having to absorb that in real time, because to your point, you were given a false narrative on some slides for 2 months. So it was really hard when I finally got up to speak and show slides and show the data to show you that this is what the data is actually showing. It was really hard for you to see it from the perspective of what the data was showing, because it was shown with a different narrative, if that makes sense.
Well, I think, so one piece that came up, I think, in general with our conversations is like, what is the information that'll be shared? And I was wondering if maybe we could come to some agreement on because the school committee, you present the data to the school committee and have a sense of what that data is. Like, and I know when I was on school committee, we got the data we most got was on the student outcomes, was what we looked at. And then the superintendent was evaluated, the only sort of into operations really was the evaluation of the superintendent and whether or not those outcomes changed over a period of time in those conversations behind the scenes. And so I don't know, I'm wondering if we could sort of reach some agreement on maybe what some of those data sets are and the kind of dialogue that CPAC has with those, in addition to just being in the community comment section and listening to them as they're prepared. And I don't know, too, what your practice is around giving data sets ahead of time or without that story, because and this is all the only thing we did in Maynard, I don't know if this is your practice here, but when the data was presented at the committee, it was the first time everybody was hearing. It was just sort of a general practice that the school practitioners would say, here's the data that we're looking at, here's the story that we think that it tells. And then we had ongoing conversations afterwards, but they sort of had that first foray into here's the data on the student outcomes that we're looking at. And then there could be follow-on conversations after. Because I agree with you, you can't always sit and sort of absorb a data set fully in that moment, and you need time to think about it and to look at it, think from different angles, and maybe come back and have some questions. And I would imagine you get that data out there, there's probably, I'm imagining you often have continual dialogue with school committee members on that, because I imagine sort of you're doing some of the same things. Does that sound like something that would be helpful? Does that?
I gotta be honest, I'm completely confused.
Thank you for saying
that. I really am. I just want to understand, in terms of us working collaboratively together, what are we able to agree on in terms of sharing of information within the purview of CPAC for the purpose of keeping parents informed, to help you folks feel comfortable and parents in the community feel comfortable and safe. The children, to your point, you said it beautifully, Amanda, we want to make sure the kids are okay, and to make sure that there's a trust between us and that we're all on the same page, that there's no myths being perpetuated on social media or assumptions being made around what the data is saying, not saying, and that does come down to trust. If we're presenting a data set and folks on the parent side are feeling like it's not accurate, it doesn't make sense, we really just have to figure out how we're going to move forward in this. I'm willing to give anybody any information that they need. I just don't, in my opinion, I don't want assumptions to be made about what I'm saying as being false, misleading, or causing a distrust. That's not why I'm here. I mean, I've been in this role for 8 years. I care about kids. I wouldn't be doing this job, it's a hard job, if I didn't care about the work. And I want to work collaboratively. So I really just want to figure out what is the best way to do that we can talk about multiple data sets and this and that, but it confuses me the way that we've just framed
Sorry,
it.
thank
That's
you for saying
okay,
that.
because I'm just sitting here thinking, well, what data sets are we talking about? Are we talking about every data set from like the beginning of the budget process till the end? I mean, there's all this.
What I was talking about is like, what do you present to the school committee on a regular basis, and could we
Right.
agree on what
So-
CPAC sort of how they participate in the conversation
Yeah.
around that
Okay.
might be different from just audience participation. So thank you for
I-
saying you were confused.
Yeah, I just was, because I'm trying to, as
Yeah.
as I'm trying to map out, because I want to map out my work and make sure that it's productive in our meetings together. And that, we're giving all the information that we need to give to help everybody feel okay with what we're doing here in our work. So that being said, I mean, Carol, I guess I'll just look to you in terms of, our role at school committee. We come forward, and I'm just thinking budget season, we come forward, I have my presentation, we have all of the information from the budget process. You ask lots of thoughtful questions. I'm happy to answer any questions, always happy to answer any questions that you folks have around that process. I guess
Can I
maybe.
interrupt for just a second?
Sure.
So there's the data that's presented, and as it's coming out, we have a liaison to the school committee who can come. Then if you've got the monthly meetings, where you have an opportunity here, if you're having sort of the monthly meetings, to have a deeper, more in-depth conversation, asking questions, saying, you framed it this way, as I look at the data set, I'm sort of understanding it that way, and that just might be a good time to have just more discussion around that, and you'll have had the data set for, I don't know, a week, 3 weeks, whatever the interval would be, but some time to digest, which I think makes sense, and then an opportunity for questions. Does that meet your interests?
It does.
Yeah?
Yeah. And as far as, we can give a list of data sets that we would like you to keep, going forward, that we, but something might come up where we might ask for something that we don't know we need.
Right.
And we should be able to, if it's not on the list, we should be at least
Have a
able to ask
conversation
for
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that fair?
It is. I just want to make sure I'm clear again in this work moving forward for these monthly meetings, as we're talking about data sets, when we're getting into the operational side of things, to what extent? And this goes to your question, Jeff. To what extent? So if you come forward, how many people are in the cafeteria, Karen? Well, why? How many? How many children are being supervised? Why is that decision, to what end? I need that clarity, because I need to know, like, in those monthly meetings, what my role is when these agendas are being set and there's questions like that.
Well, I'm leery of us saying that there are particular data sets that we want active all the time. I think that what happens in the world of public education is, something surfaces. We've given 100 examples tonight, whether it's unified PE, issues in the cafeteria, 18 to 22 program. We've talked about a lot of different things. And so I think that when someone comes to us and says, hey, we're hearing from a few parents that, they're really a little bit upset because we've had a couple of paraprofessionals who have left this building and it feels very piecemeal the way people are filling in, and we're not sure that our kids are getting the best education they possibly could. Now, there's a data set to gather, right? And all data isn't quantitative. We can't represent everything numerically because a lot of it is qualitative. So I am very leery of saying that, yep, these are the 4 things that we're going to keep track of, we promise from now on. I think that when we want data, what we do is we just allow it to kind of bubble up, and then we go and we get both the quantitative pieces and the qualitative pieces, whether that means that we're interviewing the principals and the team chairs and all the folks that Karen just talked about, or whether that means that, as Jeff said, I have a solution to this problem, here's what it is, and if in 2 weeks you don't see a change, you give me a call back. I think that there are just more organic ways to do this rather than to get very mired in what data do we need going forward starting from this very moment tonight. Because a lot of that data, we could collect it all, and it could come to no end. Yes.
And also, a lot of school systems don't necessarily have the staff time to continually be in a data.
Yes.
I mean, data requests can be very time-consuming and expensive in that sense, which doesn't mean that when the data is important that you don't want to invest in it, but there's a sweet spot there. So we've got 15 minutes left. We've agreed to, am I correct in assuming that we've agreed to these meetings and you have enough of an understanding of what's going to happen with them? I still don't know who takes care of this monthly meeting, who owns the monthly meeting. And I'm going to come back to what remains in just a minute, but I just want to clarify what we've agreed to and then ask what still remains in terms of questions or conversations.
I would say that that could be something that the school committee liaison to CPAC could organize those and say, what are the agenda items, just as an organizational piece of owning it, not as the driver of what the issues are. But I'm also open to having you say you don't want me to do it, but I'm offering that if that would be helpful to have the school committee person organize that and facilitate to make sure it happens on a monthly basis at least. Does that
And this could
work
also
for you, Karen?
just for the first couple, you can then change
Yep.
it. But I think just leaving here, having one person responsible for it increases the likelihood it'll happen. So you, as the school committee liaison to CPAC, you will own this. You won't necessarily drive the agenda, but you'll take reaching out to Dr. Zaleski and CPAC to find out what might need to be on the agenda, as well as adding some things for school committee. Yep?
Yes.
Okay.
One of the things we often do is use either a Google Sheet or a Google Form, and you
Okay.
just put in the date, the topic, and take notes. And then it's a
Okay.
rolling agenda, and you have it historically. So it might be, and then anyone can add to it.
Yeah, that sounds great if you want to do that. We've got one public meeting where CPAC presents to school committee the parent perspective. You're gathering data from the community and saying this is what we're hearing. That'll take place sometime in October. CPAC, this one I don't know if we got to. Hold on, hold that for just a moment. We've got school committee and the superintendent, at least maybe other members if appropriate, goes to a CPAC meeting. The school committee, superintendent listens. School committee talks about what have we done, what went well, what would you like to do going forward, and it's sort of more, this is a conversation, but that you'll let people know what's on your mind and what you want to talk about so that everybody can come prepared to that and you as CPAC own this. Yes? Good?
Can I ask a clarifying question, just looking at those? So
Yeah.
the way I'm understanding is that the one meeting, CPAC is coming to our meeting, and another we are going there, and then my
Yes.
understanding of the roundtable is that it's a little bit like we did listening session, when we did the listening
Okay.
series, where
But
we're.
an in-person rather than on Zoom.
Yes, I think in person is nice. And then we have a more open dialogue in terms of what the topics are, but they're specific to special education. We may not have the answers, but we're having a conversation. Is that?
And there wouldn't necessarily be an agenda driven for that because
It
it's
is-
kind of a listening session, so
Yep. And it-
parents would come with like asking for it to be on an agenda.
Yeah, if I could just clarify the CPAC, the roundtable meeting. I think that would just be more for, the general public and also just CPAC families to just, be able to just answer questions and get answers, just not in the setting where it's like recorded and things, but just where they can feel comfortable to come forward with their concerns because, in talking with a lot of families, I think that's something that they're looking for, to just be able to have, get answers and just have that dialogue. And I think that would be, beneficial for our families and probably beneficial for the administration too, to just, just to have that channel of communication, knowing that there's a meeting coming up where they can, just talk.
Would that be a regularly scheduled CPAC meeting that we would join? Or, I think I know, that Dr. Zaleski goes to many of the CPAC meetings that are scheduled, so I didn't know if we could.
They're not really meetings.
They're not
though.
meetings.
They're more like parent
Events.
information
Like a
sessions.
Q&A.
Presentations,
Yeah.
the presentations, workshops.
Would it be helpful, and I don't have the answer to this, but to have some that are meetings kind of like, I can remember before the pandemic, we'd meet in the high school library and there would be just, it wouldn't be necessarily presenting on a particular topic, but it would just be a conversation, and there might be a list of things that, you can come up with ahead of time of what's going to be discussed, but kind of, and I'm looking to you because I know you were at the meetings back at the high school library.
I was, and to Dr. Kavanaugh's earlier point, at times they weren't always productive, and we didn't have the right people at the table. And so what I meant by that, and I used the example earlier, is if I'm sitting in the high school library and we have CPAC there, and they come with, different parents come with lists of questions, which I'm happy to always answer, but then certain things came up. where I just didn't have answers. Like, there's a theme about high school, guidance, or there's a theme about kids in the cafeteria. I need the principals there. Like, so I don't want it to become an unproductive session where I'm sitting in a chair and people have a list of concerns and I don't have answers, because that's really what it turned into. And then I was writing notes and saying, oh, let me talk to Mr. Bishop, so it didn't feel, it just didn't feel like a productive meeting. So I think it'd be more important, if we're going to whatever format we decide we're gonna do it, and again, I'm happy to do it, but know ahead, and then we could even have guest speakers, because we've done that. Like, we've had Mr. Bishop come, or we did a literacy night, and we had folks come to answer questions about, ELA.
Right.
Like, that's good stuff.
That's, I think, what I mean, is there could be an agenda of what the topics were, but it wouldn't necessarily be a presentation, but it might be like the topic of conversation is, not to harp on the cafeteria. And to be clear, our cafeterias are lovely, and I've heard no issues about the cafeteria. But that might be a topic on the agenda, and there might be things that kind of bubble up that then are put on a future agenda item list, and you take back, and you have the opportunity to think, okay, who's best to talk about whatever the particular issue is, who's best to be able to think about it.
Sounds like there's a piece of balance, though, that there's some that's planned that people know and is coming that you can prepare for. And then if there are a couple of pieces that people bring rather organically that you didn't prepare for, that's okay. It's not, you're not sitting there taking like a whole just list of things that you wind up with, like trying to interpret your pad of paper. Is that accurate?
That's not actually what I
Okay.
meant.
Thank you for
Exactly. What I
clarifying.
meant more was that the list of things that were not on the planned agenda be brought back to a future meeting.
Okay.
That you then have the opportunity, and I mean, of course, some of the topics would come up in the monthly meetings anyway, so that there would be multiple points of getting out what people wanted information on. Does that?
Yes, and I think if we know some of the topics to in advance, it's helpful. And I want to remind folks, we have a K-5 director now too. So when elementary specific things come up, I'll invite her to some of these meetings. So I just want to make you folks aware, because things may come up that are specific to, geez, I heard that this is happening with, elementary, inclusion. Help me understand. And it's really helpful for me to have that person, involved in some of this work too.
And you can bring in you bring in the people if you know the topics.
Well,
Yes.
that's correct. So, like I said, because then I'll have my support person there as well, who's got key information, who's in the trenches in the classrooms, that can
What if
answer
we
maybe
did it-
some bigger questions.
Sorry. What if we did it once a year and had all the team, like the building principals and the
Team chairs. Sure.
and the directors?
That'd be great.
Then it would be once a year.
I think that's
Anybody
great.
could come and ask a question,
Yeah.
and it's not like you have to have the answer. You just, the question's asked, okay, I can follow up with you on that.
I think that's a good
It's just a
idea.
face-to-face that I think it would increase the
Trust building.
trust building between the community and event.
Nancy, you said a second, and it links into what Jen's talking about now, as you're talking in the conversation about, maybe the discussion is a literacy event or something like that. That's, again, I know I keep coming back to like this concept of what does the advisory role look like? That's advisory. It's saying, the parents need to know more about X.
Right.
And it would be great if you could communicate that more robustly, or, and that just seems like such a great thing. And Jen, the way you just explained, how we might do that's advisory. I know I'm kind of like on a one-trick pony here, but I keep thinking about well, that's what the advisory looks like. It's advising on here's how this could be best done to take care of our kids and their parents, and it seems like those are a couple actionables right there.
So we agreed on all of this here? So a one-time per year with team chairs, building principals, admin. The only thing this needs is an owner. Who's going to own this?
Also, when would that be done? When is that most effectively done, too? When does everybody think that's most effectively done? Because that's could be a preemptive capture of the questions going into a school year,
Right.
could be a post-year breakdown, or when do you think it's
Maybe
most-
just a few weeks after school has started, so that people can get their feet wet.
That's a great
then
idea.
I think
I was thinking
before
October.
things start, people don't have
Yeah.
questions, but after things start, people are like, wait, I have so many questions.
Yeah, I don't
So
know what's
just,
going
like,
on.
Yeah, they don't know what to ask yet,
Yeah.
so maybe
Yeah.
just
Late September?
something
Yeah.
like
Is
that.
that a
Yeah.
good time for building principals and staff?
Right.
The only-
After back to school nights too.
Well, right, there's a lot of open houses and back to school nights. I was gonna suggest like October, just for that purpose.
Families will have been in the building, they will
Right.
have gotten a little bit of understanding of how the year's going.
Does that work?
Makes
Because
sense.
Yeah.
the back to school nights and all that stuff too can like take parent time as well, so we've got like, all right.
We usually complete them in September, so early October would be smart.
Who owns this?
Can I ask about timing?
Yeah.
This is there's a lot of meetings, so I'm thinking about, you know, I think the first comment you made is that like the school committee and the administration have a lot of other things besides CPAC. So particularly with the administration acknowledging that, I'm wondering if the roundtable could be like a 7 a.m. breakfast or 8 a.m. breakfast, or something during the school that's more, it's, you know, having the administrators out a lot, it's just a lot to ask. The days are really, really long, and I just didn't know, I don't know how you feel about that, I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not even probably at this meeting, maybe I am. I guess the school committee is, yeah.
For time, for the sake of time, could we put an owner on this and have the owner of this ask, because it's March, and if it's going to take place next year, there's some time to sort of figure that out. We might not need to use, I think it's an excellent question, and it's also an excellent question too. We need to think about meeting demand for everybody, for parents as well. And I think, Jen, one thing you had said, maybe it wasn't you who had said this, but to think these could be like every other month once you sort of get up and going as well. You know, to think about like what that demand is on everybody's time.
I would like to be mindful of sustainability, like once
Sorry,
the
I
people,
didn't understand.
sustainability, like
Yes.
once all the people at this table have moved on, how does this continue beyond us? Like, we are the owners of it today.
Exactly.
But can we pass it on to our next generation of folks that love our kids, and how does that happen?
So I still want owner for that particular one, and I think
Yeah.
thank you for my segue. I always love it when I get a
Oh, wow.
nice softball. Okay, don't maybe laugh at my spelling on a flip chart. Let's see. I think that's one question to ask.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the outstanding questions that we didn't get to. So what are some of the other things that might have been important for us to talk about that you feel we haven't had time, because we are at 5 to 8? And I just want to, if there's a way to capture some things we haven't captured that people say, like, I actually still both feel that I really need to talk about, or I'm still unclear about, or something.
I'd like to see policy, like actually written into policy within the school committee, that, you're right, it does kind of live beyond any of us at this table, and it would be nice to have it that this is what, living up to the statute, what that looks like in Hopkinton going forward, and that it's an actual policy.
I agree with that.
And that is something that I think is a great piece of moving it beyond the group at this table, to move it, and it then becomes reviewed, you know, in 10 years, 5 years or whatever, periodically when we're even gone. Is this still working? Is the policy meeting the need? But there is a template for what is supposed to be happening.
Do you have a point person for policy on the school?
We
committee?
do, we have a
do.
working group.
You do? Can we bump this to the working group in
Definitely.
conjunction with CPAC?
Yeah.
Okay.
I definitely looked at, I think Sudbury and Acton Boxborough had like policy, which, as most policies are, was fairly short, and then had protocols and a procedure document that was linked, so those are different, but we can, I think we definitely, I agree with you, it would be good to have the framework in a policy, and then if we have communication or meeting protocols, those are very tactical, but we put those in a procedure that's linked typically.
And then it's just an expectation that,
Yes.
you know, going forward, that we're all looking to live up to.
Right.
Yeah. So
And that
some,
it's
some
written.
more work to do there, but we've got point people on it. And it's, what else is outstanding for folks?
We didn't talk about how to best support one another.
Okay.
And I think that's absolutely critical for sustainability, is how is administration going to feel supported in this process? CPAC feel supported, the parent community feel supported. I mean, I'd like to learn more about that in terms of administration feeling supported, especially during difficult conversations And when there's a disagreement, I think that's really important for sustainability, to be able to work together and to have this be successful.
I think that has to be defined by you guys, right? Like, I don't know what that would look like from my perspective as a school committee member. Like, how do you feel supported? In what ways? And that's obviously not a question we can answer now. But I think it has to be defined by because I don't have the perspective of an administrator or a member of the CPAC board. I sit in the middle. Right?
Are there things, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Are there things that, I'm thinking back to when we're defining our norms for our relationship as a school committee, and like things that we throw out that seem like they would be supportive and helpful for all people, like that we get our information that we need from the superintendent, we ask for it by like Tuesday of a Thursday, right? A Tuesday of a Thursday meeting. I'm all mixed up because we're here on a Wednesday. Things that would be really concrete that would be helpful, maybe that we could work on together. Because I think you're right. I think the administration feeling like we're all working, with the school committee, with CPAC, like that, kind of like a triangle. We're all working together in a way that we want to make sure that it feels like we're best able to support our kids and our families. And when we're all kind of out of whack with one another, we're not our best together, if that makes any sense.
100% second the norms. I think the norm, it works for us.
Yeah, it helps us a lot to be able to fall back on, to be able to.
I wonder because we are beholden to the community, right? In a way that CPAC, in a kind of opposite way, they are a legal oversight, right? So I don't think they have. The way I see it is that I work for the community, and rightly or wrongly, I work for CPAC because they are the legal oversight body, right? I don't know if that's the commonality or if the common, because we are a legal entity. We are elected by a community. I speak for the community. Our legal mandate is to work with CPAC as an advisory board, right? You may not see it the way that I see it, or the way that I envision it when I read the laws, right? So I don't know if best practices as they need to get us questions.
I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that specifically. I threw that out as an example.
Oh, okay.
There were things I'm sorry. Did not mean to.
No,
I'm
sorry. The way I envision it is that I just as I am beholden to the community, I am beholden to CPAC.
So, I think we're all beholden to
Yeah,
the community.
correct.
What I was picturing was a group set of norms of
Sure,
how we
okay.
all best feel that we can work together.
That could be my misunderstanding.
I maybe shouldn't have thrown out something specific to just the superintendent and the school committee's relationship, but I really mean working together with what's helpful for you guys, what's helpful for all of us here, that in terms of, are there things that we could do to better
I get what
make
you're
that,
saying. And I agree with you.
I'm glad you asked questions though, because that was not.
So I put up on the chart, develop norms for working through tough issues. Like it's really easy to work collaboratively together when things are easy and there are no tough decisions. But when things get tough, it becomes a lot harder. And having some just sort of shared agreements for if you hear such and such, you ask questions first before posting on social media or assuming.
Can I address the social media
I know,
thing?
this keeps
Because
coming up.
we asked questions. We didn't go to social media and just spread misinformation. We went to social media to community organize because we weren't getting the data that we needed to understand what's happening. And putting a repository online to empower families and uplift teachers and figure out what our next steps are.
It's definitely a powerful tool.
I don't believe it was misused.
Okay, and I'm sorry for implying that. I do think, though, that the impact of social media on the working relationships was there. And the question of what are going to be your norms when you're working together, social media is part of that. It's an incredibly powerful tool for communicating, so I think there are ways to ask how can it be used well, and there might be some benefit to also asking were there some things that could potentially have been done differently as well. And I don't know the answer to that, so I apologize. But I do think it's a piece, my sense is from my conversations, it's a piece where there's some discussion to be had on that. We are at 8:05, so I want to be respectful of your time. I do also want to close. I like to close often by just asking for plus, delta. Plus, what are the things that you liked about this meeting? What worked? Delta, what might be some things that you would do differently? I use this in meeting facilitation partly because as we can identify what helps contribute to conversations, well, we can continue doing them and gather. It's a way of just sort of building in continuous learning into group gatherings. So when I do it when I teach too. So plus, anybody have any things you want to throw out that you say this worked particularly well for today?
I think it's good that we're all able to come to the table. We went through a difficult budget season, and I feel like this is a nice opportunity for us to get back on track as a committee, really, all parties here, and to help the parents, and ultimately with the goal of making sure kids are supported to the fullest extent. So for me, that's a plus. The delta for me is the confusion around what data, when, how much, like that. I just want to make sure we get to the heart of that, because when we do come together, and to your point, Amanda, we're so very busy, I want to make sure our sessions together are productive and that they make sense and that they're meaningful without this confusion. So that for me, those are my two takeaways. And I will own that annual planning of the October meeting with team chairs and principals, because I plan the calendar with CPAC, and I think it makes sense for me to own that, because we forgot to say who'd own that. So I can own planning that early October meeting with Jen Halliday. Jen, if you're okay with that when we're planning our calendar, because I think that makes sense, and I can collaborate with everybody around their schedules.
Other plus deltas?
So a big plus delta for me was looking at what the meetings ahead are and how we're able to hopefully improve communication, improve the relationship, build trust, to feel like there's a plan, an actionable plan, even if we find out in 2 months we need to make tweaks to it, if we're able to commit to that kind of, all of us, that is meaningful to me. I'm just going to throw this out there, and I don't want to leave on the social media piece hanging out there. I think maybe that's something that sounds, there were difficult pieces on social media which are not owned by CPAC that were sometimes put out by individuals that were not CPAC people. And I think that things sometimes on social media take on a life of their own, and that is, I just wanted to add that.
And that is not a CPAC page. That was a page that happened to be created by somebody who happens to be on CPAC.
Yeah.
But that is not an official CPAC page. That was a repository for parent letters and parent concerns, and as far as if there was no misinformation on that page, it would have been taken down, absolutely. But if there is, people have a First Amendment. Is that the First Amendment? Yeah, the Second Amendment is that.
Let's not go there.
Yeah, people have a First Amendment, so I can't necessarily take away someone's voice.
And I would not, I'm not
Page.
suggesting that piece, and I'm not even talking about the pieces about the information, and not even specific just to that page. But I think in looking at social media, which I probably do more than is healthy for me as an individual, but
There's some great memes on there.
There are great memes. I love the meme. But it's challenging when you see things, knock on wood, they haven't been about me recently, but to see things that are very more personal than they are about what's going on, if that makes sense. When you see, and that's, again, it's not just specific to the one page, it's not specific even to CPAC. I just think social media can be a difficult thing in the community. It's not something that we can control, because it's, like you said, it's people can say what they can say, but it is an elephant in the room in that it is not always helpful to the process that we all have here.
Right.
Just,
but the intention of the page was not to defame anyone. It was to stop some pretty egregious cuts that were being proposed. So I don't feel like there was, it shouldn't be attached to CPAC, and there should be no issue going forward with, well, CPAC did this stuff on social media. CPAC did not do anything on social media.
Thank you.
So, and I want to go back to I assume best intentions. I actually am not even the one that brought the issue up, but like that is I want to move past kind of that piece in moving forward. I don't want to leave this meeting tonight feeling like ending on a couple minutes ago on the social media kind of breaks apart what felt like we were trying to build, if that makes sense. I'm not making sense.
No,
Okay.
I was nodding because
Okay.
I was agreeing.
Okay.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
felt
yeah,
like
okay.
we were moving in a really
Yeah.
positive direction. I think we agree more than we disagree.
Which is great.
Around this table, like every single person here. And I think that is a great strength to be drawing on. And I think the social media thing was sort of an elephant sitting there and hadn't, I don't think we talked about it at all. So it was a sort of a surprise. And I was waiting to see, like, is that going to come up? Like, what is that? What should we know about that?
It's a Supreme Court case now.
Yeah.
So we'll wait and see what they decide.
We'll hear.
I have a positive.
Yeah.
I really liked being able to ask questions for knowledge about how we see what we do, and the questions about like what is advisory. That was it's a big thing for me. And I think learning, going through the process that we went through in the last few months. One of the things that I struggled with was looking for the evidence of problems, like evidence of our kids having problems versus anticipation of our kids having problems. And so it was hard. Some of that is hard for me, and like the advising, I think there's more conversation to have, and I'm hoping we can continue the dialogue, because it's good to learn, it helps me understand the messaging that comes from you guys and the administration as well, because I think about when, again, going back to when the kids aren't okay, and we hear that from today, when they're not okay, we need to fix it. When there is a change proposed and we anticipate they will be okay, that I struggle with, because that kind of thing, I'd like to continue that discussion. I'm glad that we can start having that, because that's where I had a lot of difficulty sort of parsing out what I was hearing about what is actually a problem and what is the threat of a problem or the perception of a problem to come because of something. So I think those are good things for us to think about. Negative, I wish I had more time, and I'm looking forward to some kind of norms, and I think there's probably like a handful, not like 17,000, but I think things around maybe like turnaround time for requests, and because we have those, and I think it keeps the administration sane and it sets expectations. So and learning more about how we can leverage CPAC to get the insights that we need in a timely fashion to do the work that we do. Like I want to spend more time thinking about our cycles of work and where we could really use, making sure that what we said tonight will fit in with what we do as a board. I think, so my last thing that I wish we covered and we didn't exactly is, and it's not about social media or anything, but us as representatives of our groups versus us as individuals. And I think we all wrestle with that, because we are publicly elected people. Our board only matters as a board. Our individual opinions don't matter, our votes matter, like the collective vote. So that's always an interesting question. And it's great that we have your board here, so that, Jen, huge kudos to you for building CPAC from when we talked to you a year or two ago. I mean, there was no board, there was no organization, and it's a credit to you, and it's a benefit to the district that we have CPAC now. So I'm really excited to keep this conversation going.
My delta is like Amanda's. I wish we had a lot more time, because I think we have a lot of open tabs on our screen that we want to keep going with.
Yeah.
But the positive is, I think it's every single person in this room. We love our kids. and we love our schools. And we share that common truth and that common belief, and it's what has us here.
My positive is that it was so nice to be able to say, if we have these issues, can we come to you and not be stonewalled? Because I think as parents, we go to these IEP meetings, or our kids are kind of black boxes, and what they do in school is a black box a lot of the time, and my kids are younger, and my 8-year-old can't tell me things. So I think as parents, we have to anticipate, and so if someone's saying something that could potentially impact our kids negatively, then we have to think about that. So it was really nice to have somebody, to have you say, if we have these issues, we can come to you, and you're going to listen to us and respond.
Yeah, it was nice to be here with, I think, a sincerity and a civility that we've been lacking.
Which is a credit to everybody here.
Mhm.
Good, really
Yes.
good work, everybody. Really, really good work. Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to have been here. Glad to have sort of assisted in your process with your conversation, but you know, the credit's really for all of you and the good work that you did and the constructive dialogue that you were able to have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As a matter of formality, just because we are a public body, I would need a motion to adjourn before we actually can adjourn from the school committee.
So moved.
Okay, so there's a motion by Jen.
Second.
Second by Holly. All those in favor?
Aye.
And we are adjourned at 8:16. Thank you very much to everybody for coming and for anyone who tuned in at HCAM. And thank you, Amy, Rebecca.
Yes, thank you.
Much appreciated. All right. The one plus I did not want to just throw out there is I have
One, two, three, four.